Hello, Psych 460. This is the wrap up to week 7. We had a snow day, so I thought I'd give you a little snow background. It didn't look quite like that, mostly because I don't have windows that look like that. But delighted to have you with me here, and we're gonna work on the rest of our slides. So let me get to our slides here and share with you. So here we are, and as we kind of wrap up this, there were a number of poll everywhere questions, but I pulled those out and we will take care of them on Tuesday. So the first thing we want to get back to in our content on religion, ethics, and morality is that there are lots of traditions that also inform this. It's not just coming from religion. So humanism is going to be a component that you're going to want to hold on to. And we know humanism and humanistic philosophy has been around for a long time. It certainly has influenced psychology since the 1950s most strongly. So you would know the name Maslow quite prominently with that. So when we look at the impact on sexuality, it's really about focusing on what is good, and intimacy is the goal. There's a value of intimacy and really opposing anything that's going to harm or be negative. Very tolerant, compassionate, and going to be reactive to any of the aesthetic right and wrong judgmental components. Okay, so moving on to some of the world religions and the influences they have. For those of you that are familiar with Islam, you may, and we're going to look at this as classical Islam rather than kind of the other applications of Islam, because just like with all religions, uh, there are the ways that it was intended and then the ways that it is actually practiced. So classical Islam actually puts out that sex is positive. And one of the statements you would see that Muhammad really saw this as a good value, not so much the sex, but the sex in marriage. There's a sanction against polygamy and concubinage. I cannot say it with what's going on with my upper respiratory infection, but that doesn't mean that those that are part of the Islamic faith aren't finding ways around that. It's not a monolithic faith. There's lots of varieties in the way Sharia is applied, and you're going to find that it's going to depend, and that means that there's going to be differences, particularly related to gender. Islamic law does encourage contraception. They really do like family planning, and Islamic law recognizes that there are 4 genders. There's male, female, intersex, and the effeminate male. So they have a broader view of gender than you'll find in some of the other religious practices. Okay. And Hinduism. Hinduism is actually a term that encompasses so many faith practices that it is hard to call it a religion. It is saturated with animism and mythology and all sorts of very ancient religious practices. But there are 4 general understood approaches, and you know Kama. I don't know if you might have heard of Dharma and maybe Moksha. And then Artha is about success and material wealth. And you're going to see that probably more practiced by the Brahmin, so upper caste. All of these are going to be regional. And so you'll find just like in the United States, you're going to have kind of the Southern and Texan kind of Bible Belt kind of components, whereas you see the coasts in the US being more liberal in religious and faith practices. That's going to also be true in the different regions are going to have different practices of Hinduism. So note that. You probably know the Kama pleasure because practice of Hinduism because of the Kama Sutra, and it's a very explicit. It's called a masterpiece of what to do to practice sexual activity and pleasure, and it does testify to the high view of sexuality. I will say that in both Islam and Hinduism, much of this is going to be pleasure for the males of the upper castes in practicing Hindu cultures and upper caste systems, maybe loosely understood as a caste system in others. We have caste system everywhere, but it's not always identified by a specific caste name. Buddhism, actually, there are different branches of Buddhism. The one that I mentioned on Tuesday that was initiated by the original Buddha is a strict non-indulgence of desires. And this is a high discipline ascetic approach to the practice. Um, the Mayana is that the ethics are towards loving others, and it's more about the generosity and about giving. And you'll probably see this outside of India more than you'll see it in India, even though Buddhism began in northern India. And then Tantric Buddhism teaches that is the one that really focuses on sexuality and teaches that there's a union that's between the female energy, the Shakti, and the male energy, the Shiva. And so the union of them is part of the practices that you might see emulated within the Tantric Buddhism practices. Again, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, uh, is whatever other ones that I have yet to mention. Major religions have their prescribed practices, but the way they're actually applied are going to be regional, community, and individual. And we all know what that looks like. So that leads us to Christianity, another world religion, and you're going to see more than one version of this. Catholicism is going to fall under Christianity, as are a number of others. Distinct among Christianity is an insistence on monogamy. And that is, well, there may be aspects of that in Islam. It's really not so prominent as it is in Christianity. And that comes from the Judaism piece. Although, if we go way back, it wasn't there in the beginning. As we know, there were multiple wives. Solomon certainly had concubines. So sex in marriage is recommended for pleasure, comfort, mutual bonding, and that is provided there. That's what this it would likely be taught from a church perspective. And the negativity of the Christian tradition is going to be rooted in Stoicism and Neoplatonism. I don't know if I can say anything clearly today, but you're going to see it there. And that is probably about the temptation to sin there and rooted in that. Celibacy is actually celebrated within certain aspects of Christendom. And you'll see in the New Testament, Paul actually addresses that celibacy can be a good thing. And you'll see within different practices within Christendom that there are those that set their lives aside to be monks and hermits in celibacy. Moralism then is a contemporary issue in our sexual ethics. So we're shifting into the issues. We wrapped up our world religions there. And in this moralism, there's this attitude that there's a strict right way of behavior, and that the highest goal is to do that right way of behavior. Moralists are going to want people to do good, so they're looking towards conduct that is good. So they're going to be against harm, and they're going to be favoring more of what's good for the community, and that might mean that the individuals have less freedom. Pluralism is more of a political attitude than you'd see with moralism, but also a philosophical attitude. And it's going to have that competition that it recognizes between opinions and beliefs, and that there's going to be the opportunity for discovering truth when we view all of those perspectives and come to that. They really do believe that the individual has freedom to choose, and that there's needs to be an acceptance that everyone gets to choose for themselves. Now, obviously, these are extremes in the practice. You're not typically going to see the extremes, although they do make it into social media and the news most often. So think about this in terms of rigid behavior following a prescribed set of laws to do whatever you want, whatever's good for you. And most people are going to fall in the middle between those. So other issues that are going to show up is this, there's a few, but sex outside marriage or monogamy is one of the issues that shows up. Fornication is going to be sex with people that are unmarried, and in general, depending on the practice, historically this has been seen as immoral. And so you're going to see the morality piece coming into that. But that's obviously not kept people from having sex for a long time outside of married pieces. And then the other aspect of that, addressing monogamy, is adultery. And this is going to be voluntary, emphasis on that, sexual intercourse by one partner with someone other than that one spouse. And there's a sense that in the marriage vows, there's a commitment to monogamy, and this has always been regarded as a grave matter. And this really goes back to more the moral practices, but you're going to see that infused culturally within communities, regardless of the practicing, that people assume there's a faith piece to the partner. One of the things that I've noticed in my lifetime is that when I was growing up, you could go out on dates with more than one person in a period of time, and that there wasn't a faith, I got to choose a different word, a commitment. If you went out with someone on a date, that was just enjoying that time with them. Whereas it seems that in some of the practices today with younger people, when they go out on a date, that has an exclusive nature to it, and they can't be dating more than one person at a time. That's been a change, and I'm not sure when we think about adultery. There's obviously many people have concerns, but it seems like this monogamy piece actually has gotten even outside of marriage to a sense of any kind of emotional commitment to a relationship may require a sense of monogamy, and the violation of that may be actually reacted to as if it is an aspect as serious as adultery. So it's a betrayal. So there's a lot maybe that needs to be talked about in relationships so that individuals can understand what is meant by, yes, we're going out. Other things, sex outside marriage and monogamy trends actually in this area are that there's less strict positions on sex outside marriage. There's open marriages. There's communities of open marriages. You can partner with these communities, and you can have set up dates with other couples. These are interesting times to be able to have this be so public, and you may be aware of some of those aspects. Things that are also influencing this would be later marriage, contraception, and then divorce and widowhood, and then sexuality that starts earlier and earlier. And so there's a set of questions that we want to look at there, and you can see them on the screen. If there's relationship that's outside of that committed relationship, such as a marriage, how is respect being addressed? How are those other components? Now, I recognize that there are some couples that work this out. For example, if someone is so seriously disabled that they cannot partner physically with their partner, they may decide that for the needs of that partner, he or she or they can go partner with someone else to get their needs met physically, and that could still be in a respect and affection and commitment piece with genuine openness and honesty. But these are not often what we think of when we think of a sex outside marriage. So you probably have the more traditional view of those pieces also in your mind, along with more of the contemporary views. So the ethical emphasis is that we should be looking at the violence or the coercion or the taking advantage of another that might be happening in our sexual relationships. And that's where the ethicists are looking for an emphasis at this time. So the next issue would be contraception, and the Roman Catholic Church is going to oppose anything that's an artificial means, as they define it. And I have to say at this point, the list is going to be too long for us to discuss. You can explore on your own. Jews and most Protestants are going to focus on responsible family planning by married couples, and ethicists would suggest that sexually active unmarried persons ought to be using birth control. And these days they might say sexually active unpartnered persons. So there's that. And then the next issue we've addressed in the chapter before, but this is about abortion, and it's, as you're aware, a very contentious topic in our country right now. There's no consensus on the relationship between abortion and contraception in any real culture at the ground level. One of the few distinctions that seems to be available for reasonable conversation between the factions is therapeutic versus elective abortion, and looking at those. And therapeutic would be for the health of the mother, and recognizing the impact of that pregnancy, or if there's no likelihood that that fetus is going to be viable ultimately. So continuing that topic, pro-life or anti-abortion position, the leadership is prominent from the Roman Catholic Church. However, we do have voices coming from other Christian, particularly in the US, churches, that there's this value for life, and that life begins in the womb. And that's part of that component, that if we're ending that life, it's considered ending a life with murder. So there's this distinction made between human life and human personhood that still is up for debate. And each community is maybe vetting that. The Roman Catholic Church has their line because they actually do come up with lines on things. I don't think a lot of other churches come up with lines as cleanly as the Roman Catholic Church does. The pro-choice position is going to have two basic pieces. The absolute, that pregnancy is solely for the woman and her concern, and because it's her body that's the vessel, and the modified, that there may be many situations where abortion is going to be the least bad choice in that situation. Absolute has a lot of problems because that negates the father in, or any partners in that relationship, and there's some consequences that may come into that are beyond the issue of the woman's choice. So again, talking about what this means. And then the modified has its own issues, like who gets to make those least bad decisions, and based on whose values and what's going on there, and are all involved having some say in that decision. So Gallup has a poll. This is, as you can see, pretty recent, going all the way up to 2022, and we can see some changes. Legal under circumstances has risen in the last 2 years. So there's an increase in, yes, that's going to be viable for more. And then legal only under certain circumstances, not going down as much, but there's some. And then the illegal in all circumstances is decreasing significantly. So there's a change on that. And then this, Americans' attitudes towards abortion, and you can see that pro-choice is the increase and pro-life is a decrease. So there are current trends. This is from your text. So yes, it's dated. It's from Pew Research, and there was no update for that, but you can see that there are different religious practices that are going to have a say. Jehovah Witnesses and Mormons are the strongest against in this, or I guess to read that data more accurately, have the fewest that say that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. Okay, another issue is homosexuality in terms of sexual ethics. Um, Society as a whole, specifically religious communities, are the ones that have been part of this debate. The rejectionist position is that it opposes any acts between persons of the same gender. A lot of the religious traditions are going to modify that. So regarding the orientation is morally neutral, but the acts as the rejected component. So it's that love the sinner, hate the sin component that I'm sure many of you have heard. At the other end are going to be those that are full acceptance, usually based on their view of the Bible, which would be seen as revisionist from the original view that was given to us through the Catholic Church. Episcopal Church stands with a few others for full civil rights and liberties, and we've seen some changes in the Presbyterian Church, and others. Quakers have had some splits over it. So you'll see some Quakers have really gone more to the Unitarian perspective. And then you'll see that there is a specific church, Metropolitan Community Church, and there's one in Portland. The issues that continue to provoke this within those religious traditions are going to be the marriage and the ordination within those church practices. So that takes us to technology and sexual ethics. When we think about this, this comes back to what is life, when does life begin, and then how do we make decisions on what is good for those components. So the problem is that technology is increasing so rapidly that we may not have had the time to absorb what this means morally for us. And if you want to think about it in terms of some of the things that we talked about, China, they have aborted a lot of girls because they want boy babies. So the technology has allowed for understanding the gender of the fetus, and they are making decisions on that. We also know that there are individuals that are working on genetic components that will prescribe what kind of different attributes physically the child might have. And the questions in all of this are who gets to make those decisions. So it's not going to get easier. I think for any that you know or any in this class, you're likely to have some challenges to address what is the right decision and how do you make a right decision in these processes. It's a complex ethical issues, especially when we get to reproductive technology, because this technology now allows us to conceive a child outside of intercourse. And it does involve this who gets to make those decisions. And we typically think of that as God or playing God. Then the question is, who's the parent of that child? Is it the donor? Um, Yeah, and there's some question. There are even movies out, and you may have seen them on sperm donors and how many children are out there. Surrogacy, is that a good practice? Because in the slide says it may be exploited. Is this another sex trafficking component? Women giving their womb up for rent? Uh, Selecting the sex I already mentioned, and just how do we navigate that? And what does that message mean for those that may be less than, that we see as outside of the norm or the desirable? I think there's a subtle meta message that is being communicated. Other technology is going to be somatic cell nuclear transfer, and this is cloning. That's going to substitute genetic material from the adult cell for a nucleosome egg. And just the question about how is that an effective thing? This is about providing material for cloning baby organs for transplant. And the idea, especially with these versions, is that it's going to have organs that are less likely to be rejected, and that will help with treating disease. But again, are we playing God with that? So decisions about human life and reproduction, they really cannot be made just by pure science. There is an ethic, there is a morality that we have to live with. And so it is best if we do not just lean into one, but we remain in dialogue and spend some time thinking about these components. Um, and I think it's easiest if we maybe spend a little time, like we are in this class, before they become the pressing issue of the moment. So, as your textbook talks about, there's an old morality that it tends to be much more ascetic and legalistic. Um, and in that, it was always prescribed that we knew where we stood because we were told where we stood. Um, but asceticism bears witness to the fact that there's more than merely the body. A new morality is going to be a more situational approach. There's more leaning towards a hedonistic emphasis than there has been in the past. And it can lead to people being pretty irresponsible, although people have been irresponsible for a long time. So I'm not sure that's new, but now maybe it's more permissible. So what would a middle ground approach look like? How will we devise a middle one? How will medical, psychological, and sociological voices speak into that? And how can we bring wisdom and discernment when we're walking alongside another that is dealing with some of these issues? So that is the wrap up for our chapter 19. And I do hope you had a good snow day. I hope there's been some fun and joy and good pictures. And we will pick up on Tuesday with some time to complete a poll. So be ready for that. And then we'll jump into our next chapter. Um, so see you on Tuesday, as long as that snow doesn't make it really bad.